iterator should have a unique key prop. So basically, whenever you render an array, you want to add a key prop like this. So we'll say key is going to be item here. It should be unique. So once we do that, that'll go away. So now let's change this input. We'll say hello. And you'll see that as I change it, it'll be logging out whatever I type here. Just one more thing. Let's just try to onSubmit with the form. So let's just say onSubmit, this dot onSubmit, and then we close it, form, move this up, change this to onSubmit, and then we have an event there. And usually when we use onSubmit, we want to event.prevent default to prevent the page from refreshing. So say event.prevent default, and then we'll just say alert submitted. And we can submit it just by pressing enter. So let's try that. Here, enter, and you'll see that the submitted shows up. Next, let's talk about refs. If we add a ref attribute to an element, it's going to basically be a reference to that element. So we can do something like ref. And we used to be able to put strings here, or it might actually still work. So we could say input, but now the recommended way to do it is to make it a function. So a ref, it's going to give you an input as a parameter. And this is ES6 syntax. So basically input is the parameter. And we can say this dot input is equal to input. So basically now this is setting this dot input equal to basically this input tag or element right here. So now let's just say when we submit it, let's just basically console log out this dot input. So since this is a reference to this input right here, we can say this dot input dot value. So that'll actually give us the value of the input. Let's try that out. So now let's type in hello and then enter to submit. And the reason why this error showed up is because this onSubmit needs to be bound to this component. And when you pass it in as a prop like this, it won't be bound correctly unless you bind it in the constructor. So with this class syntax with ES6, you get a constructor method where we can bind these methods to this component. So let's just create a constructor method here. And then usually we put in props here. And with constructors, you need to put in super props. It's just the syntax for that. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but that's not very important. So here we're going to say this dot onSubmit is equal to this dot onSubmit dot bind this. I know this seems kind of tedious, but this is the general way to do it. There's another way to do it that might be a little bit shorter, but this is a really acceptable method, so that's fine. So let's save it. So now onSubmit, this will be actually defined, whereas it wasn't before. So let's put in hello, my name is Michael, enter, and you'll see now that it's logged correctly. Before, this was referring to the window, so this dot input was not defined, but now that onSubmit is bound to this dot input is indeed defined. So basically, whenever you pass in a method of the component to a element or to a component, you need to bind it to this component for it to work. Next, let's talk about state. We can manage the state of a component by creating a property called this.state, and it's going to be an object. So let's say we have a property in this.state called title, and let's say this is called app title, and then let's erase what's in here, and let's just set this title thing inside of an h1 by doing this.state.title, which is what we defined up here. So that should say app title here. So once we save it, it says app title. Next, let's talk about set state. This .set state is used to change the state of your component. So first, let's just get rid of this dead code right here, and also this logo, which is producing these warnings down here. So let's create a div with an onClick handler down here. You can only use onClick on certain elements. You can't do it on h1s apparently. Let's say this is going to be onClick. Let's just say click here. And then let's say that this onClick handler, and well, let's just change all of these to onClick. So here we are binding the onClick to this because we're going to be using this.setState there. Otherwise, the this.setState won't be defined. So basically, we're going to say that onClick, when we click that div, we're going to do this.setState. So we're going to change this title here by doing title. Let's say new app title. So now when we click on it, it should change this title to new app title. So let's try it out. Click here, and you'll see that it worked correctly. Once setState is called, it's going to see everything that's changed in the state of this component, and it's going to flow down to this render function. So anything that's different is going to be reflected in the new HTML here, which is going to be reflected in the browser. Next, let's talk about how to create and import components. Components are isolated, so they can be dropped into any other component easily. So first, let's create a new file here called myComponent.js. And in this component, let's just copy over what we have here. We're going to keep this as simple and basic as possible. Let's get rid of this CSS here, get rid of these methods here. And the render, let's just say the class name is component, and then the class will name this component here also. And let's just return a simple h1. This is a component that is dropped into another component. So now, right here, actually, let's name this myComponent. Oops, just this and this, myComponent. And then here, let's import in that component. So let's say import myComponent from /myComponent. Now down here, let's drop this component in here by doing myComponent, and we'll just close it like that. Now we save it. We'll see that the contents of that component were dropped into our app component, just like that. Components allow our app to be more scalable because it allows us to not allow this HTML here to grow into an enormous chunk of code that becomes really unmanageable. Instead, we can see that this myComponent has a name, and it's really easy to reason about it, and we can go into this file itself to edit just what myComponent deals with. Next, let's talk about passing and using props. We can pass props into our components by doing something like this. Let's make this multi-line. Let's pass in two different props. Let's say title is equal to, this is the component title, and let's just say name equals, let's just say Michael. And now in this component, we can access the props by doing something like title, and we can say this dot props dot title, and then down here we can do name, this dot props dot name, and then let's close this and then save it. Now you can see that this is the component title was passed in, and Michael is passed in, and we've accessed it by using this dot props here. And to make it a little bit cleaner, we can destructure this. This is using ES6 syntax that we mentioned earlier. We can say const title name equals this dot props. That way we don't need to access this multiple times, and we don't need to write that out multiple times. We can save it like that, and it'll show the same thing. We can also pass methods in here. So if we wanted to pass in this dot onClick, we can say onClick equals this dot onClick. And then in here, we can say div click me, and then we'll say onClick here, and then onClick equals onClick. Now when we click on this, it should set our state to new app title. So let's try that. And it does indeed do what the onClick says it should do. Next, let's talk about prop types. Prop types are used to enforce the type of the props of a component. It can also be used to give an overview of the interface of a component. Basically, what props it accepts and what kind of props it accepts. Prop types used to be included in React, but now it's a separate package because a lot of people don't use them, but they are extremely useful, so I'd recommend that you use them. So to use prop types, let's install them. So npm i-s will install prop types just like that. And let's go into myComponent and define some prop types. So I'm going to say import prop types from prop types. So I'm going to say const prop types equals, and you'll see down here that we have 3 props here. So the way that we define these prop types, we can say name is prop types dot string. Let's say all of these is required. Well, let's change it up. Let's say not all of them are required. So let's say onClick is prop types dot func. Let's say that's not required. And let's say title is prop types dot string, and it is required. And then down here we need to add prop types to our component. So we'll say myComponent dot prop types equals prop types. Save it. Now we'll see that nothing here has changed because all of these are fulfilled. Now let's go back to our app.js file. Now let's change one of these so it's not passing what the myComponent file is expecting. So let's change this to a number. Save